The introduction of white lists for mobile internet in Russia has become a widespread phenomenon. It's time to try and answer the questions. What is happening, why is it happening, and what do they hope to achieve by it? But most importantly, we need to answer this question. Why is it so difficult for the Russian state to fight the Russian internet? Why has it been doing this for a decade and a half, and so far has only succeeded in enriching VPN services? Therefore, our conversation will begin not with the internet as such, but with why it's so difficult to break something that society has grown accustomed to, something that is woven into its fabric. To talk about white lists and the fight against the Runet in general, let's start from afar. Why are young democracies unstable? For many institutional reasons, but there is one specific nuance of a purely cultural nature that overlays all of this. The idea of changing leaders through elections requires habit. Within the lifetime of a single generation, it must happen several times that power passes from one leader to another, and from that one to yet another. It must happen several times that the latest big boss with big ambitions and plans for great achievements falls out of favor with the voters and is sent off to write memoirs and boss around his own cat. When this has happened several times, it will be very difficult for the 5th or 10th such character in a row not just to rig elections, ban parties, or shut down media, but to violate the rules of coexistence at all. Because absolutely everyone, from the janitor to the minister, from the head of the Electoral Commission to the cop with a nightstick, understands the character will leave, following his predecessors, but the rules will remain. It is very difficult to create some sacred, royal, magical status for a person who is the 47th in his post and will soon become a political pensioner just like his 46th predecessor. It is very difficult to convince a society that is already accustomed to hiring and firing its presidents like hired hands that the next one is a czar, a god, and a military commander who stands above the law. The tradition of firing big bosses with a checkmark on the ballot is not forgotten, and those who think it is, and try to build a dictatorship on the fly, end up like certain presidents of South Korea. That is why it was so easy for Putin to break the system to fit himself, not only because the institutions themselves are weak, but because not once in the entire history of Russian statehood has there been a situation where the supreme power lost an election and went into retirement. Elections could easily be turned into a nominal procedure for extending authority because the habit of using elections as a way to change power had nothing to develop from. The procedure simply didn't have time to show that it could work that way. The same logic applies to online freedoms. Kwangmyong in North Korea, a completely isolated internet, cannot cause outrage in anyone. Quite the opposite. In a country where an ordinary home computer was an absolute luxury just 10 years ago, and mobile phones were under a complete ban, where even a landline home phone is a sign of a wealthy family, in a country that, in terms of consumer technology, was stuck in the deep 70s, a renaissance has now occurred. Half the population of North Korea has smartphones with delivery services, messengers, mobile games, funny videos, and everything else. North Koreans can't be outraged that they don't have access to YouTube, Twitter, and Telegram because they simply don't know such words exist. North Koreans didn't lose the ability to write to a friend in America or call a grandmother in China. They have simply gained the ability to send a message to a brother in a neighboring city on a phone, rather than a paper telegram by mail. One must assume, from the perspective of a North Korean citizen, it's hard to even imagine that the rest of the world is structured differently, that you can actually call another country or watch a foreign video without censorship approval. And this reality, one must think, is as difficult for North Koreans to imagine as it is sometimes for people from our parts to imagine that the President of the United States or the Bundestag in Germany are elected not by a narrow circle of a behind-the-scenes Politburo, not by some secret lodge, but exactly as it appears. People come, vote, and that's what matters. Similarly, you couldn't restrict a Soviet person from traveling abroad. For more than a generation, leaving the country was something akin to flying to the moon. And when and if one managed to break through all the barriers and go at least to Bulgaria, it looked like an achievement, not like the lack of opportunity to just go to America, which, like the Emerald City, you could read about but never see. So, the Russian internet was initially built as part of the global network, not only technically but also socially. The generation for whom the entire global internet was always available has already had time to fully grow up, finish their education, and have children. And those who were born earlier have, over the past years, become so accustomed to a free internet that it has become something taken for granted, like electricity, water supply, or sewerage, something you simply can't live without. And then bam, you get these white lists. It is very difficult to reliably assess the scale of the VPN market's growth since the beginning of the war, let alone since the blocking of YouTube. VPNs are purchased from hundreds of vendors in hundreds of different ways, from bank card transfers to paying with stars on Telegram. Any estimates would be very approximate. But just by looking at the sad managers walking around the advertising market, hunched under huge bags of cash, just to foist it on any platform, we understand VPN is now the most flourishing business sector in Russia. A market that when suppliers of sanctioned Mercedes look at it, they realize they made the wrong choice in life. It's not IT specialists or politicized activists standing in line to pay for a VPN, but, without any exaggeration, tens of millions of Russian citizens. From teenagers to pensioners, from those for whom 500 rubles is a morning latte, to those for whom it's 2% of their pension. This is evident from polls, from the 18 million views of the interview with Alla Pugacheva on the blocked YouTube, from the personal experience of many of us. Our elderly parents, grandmothers and grandfathers are adept at playing helpless. I can't do this, I can't do that, where do I click, how do I do this? But all it takes is for a 73-year-old mother to fail to reach her 33-year-old son in Europe from Russia on WhatsApp on the first try, and the crash course in tech literacy is completed in half a day. The VPN is already found, paid for, set up, and turned on all by herself, tested on our own editor. If a national mentality existed, the tradition of bypassing state prohibitions to obtain information independent of it would definitely be part of ours. The phrase, "There is a custom in Rus to listen to the BBC at night," did not come from nowhere, and it arose at a time when listening to the BBC was extremely difficult and even dangerous. The mass installation of VPNs isn't just voting with money, it's something much more valuable. It's voting with effort. From any book on sales, you will learn that getting money from someone is not as big a problem as getting a consumer to make an effort, to click an extra button, to go through an extra step, to make an extra decision. If the option to do nothing is available, people will choose it. For an ordinary person for whom the internet is not a profession, installing a VPN is not such a trivial matter. You have to think, Google, install, configure, find ways to pay. In short, you have to bother. If our citizens are doing this by the tens of millions, it means it's a vital necessity for them. It means the do-nothing option doesn't exist. This is a unique and underestimated political phenomenon. Tens of millions of citizens, the vast majority of whom are not our viewers, readers of Ekaterina Shulman or the audience of Medusa, who are not particularly involved in public and political discourse, or are not involved at all. They are often arrogantly perceived from the outside as silent loyalists who value neither rights nor freedoms, and yet they went, paid money, and made an effort to reclaim their freedom. Tens of millions of people are not just telling the state to go to hell with its restrictions, they are doing it actively and at their own expense. It is not so much the technical limitations, not so much the economic damage, which, as has been proven many times, no one cares about, but precisely this simple circumstance that prevents the state from implementing its plan to turn the Russian internet into a North Korean one. Citizens are massively and actively holding on to their internet, and the more they hold on, the more they succeed. Yes, the state has two things on its side, an unlimited amount of other people's money and the simple fact that it's easier to break than to build. It's always easier to break what was built by others' hands. But the more citizens bring their money to the VPN market, the more investment flows into this industry, and the more talented developers come to work there. Remember what Russian VPN services looked like in 2018, at the time of the Telegram block. They were makeshift services from teams of free speech and data protection enthusiasts. Now, no enthusiasm is needed there. It's now a market with billion-dollar turnovers. Those for whom freedom is their personal piece of bread have come to serve the people who want freedom. On the state's side is one big club, which they are constantly trying to improve. On the citizens' side are many talented people, the laws of market economics, and most importantly, the very structure of the internet, whose technological ancestor, ARPANET, was created to be so decentralized that it could survive Soviet nuclear bombs, let alone Putin's technological clubs. It's clear that white lists for mobile internet are another version of this club, aimed at the social degradation of the Russian internet. We won't even consider the version about protection from drones, with your permission, because it's complete nonsense. The goal is very transparent. Citizens are massively bypassing restrictions using VPNs. In principle, cutting off the Russian internet from the outside world is technically difficult and politically dangerous. Politically more dangerous than bringing back exit visas, for example. An incomparably larger percentage of citizens has had the chance to appreciate the joy of a free internet than the opportunity to travel abroad. Nothing can be done about the mass bypassing of blocks, And the main problem here is not that the entire infrastructure might collapse, that it's not just V-contact that might stop working, but power plants and airports. The main problem is that the Rosgvardia might not have enough nightsticks. Mobile internet and the white lists on it are a cunning way to suppress the very need for Western services and a free internet. White lists on mobile traffic will not affect any critical infrastructure. It all connects to the internet via cable, well, except for payment terminals and ATMs. But the idea is that they should completely nullify the point of bypassing blocks everywhere the internet is stationary. Nobody needs a messenger that only works at home and at the office. A communication system built on a delayed principle like a landline. When the subscriber is home, they'll read it. The same applies to any other services, from practical to entertainment. It's very difficult to live in a world where you have two separate internets, where the Wi-Fi drops for a minute and half your phone stops working. If you consider white lists an impassable wall, then it is indeed a diabolical plan. The third time you have to wonder if your husband has already left work and if you'll have time to message him on WhatsApp to pick up the child from kindergarten, or if you need to use a different app. On the third such occasion, you might just stop using WhatsApp. Or maybe not you, but someone will. But we see that this too failed to become a concrete wall. The Kwangmyong plan failed, and it's failing on mobile internet with white lists too. There are already VPN services that know how to bypass them as well. This means there is no devilry here either. Once again, the desire of citizens to keep their freedom for themselves, the market economy, and the structure of the internet as a network have made it possible to overcome this too. We see once again to what extent a societal habit, whatever it may be, is, while informal, a genuine institution that is very difficult to break, and harder to do so than with any formal one. No question. If the Soviet regime had survived to this day, and the internet had developed under it in the only form it could have, where no one would even think of any international connection, and people would just wait in line for 10 years for a twisted pair cable to watch the Mosfilm archives. In that scenario, the state would have had no problems controlling the network. But it turns out there is a huge difference in what is built from the start, a cowshed or a drawbridge. Rebuilding our beautiful drawbridge into a cowshed turns out to be very difficult. Everyone is used to the bridge being so beautiful, large, and a drawbridge at that.